Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Sunday, August 16th. Tonight we drift slowly across 26 countries, from Vanuatu to Russia. There's nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Settle in, and let the world turn. Vanuatu, that scattered archipelago in the Southwest Pacific, finds itself in an unfamiliar kind of conversation these days, one about trust and what it costs to keep it. The country has been placed under a bond of $20,000 tied to concerns about visa overstayers. It is the sort of news that sounds small in dollars but large in what it means. For a nation of fewer than 300,000 people spread across dozens of islands, reputation is not abstract. It is how you move through the world. Vanuatu's passport has long been one of its most valuable assets, not just for citizens traveling, but as part of programs that bring in revenue the islands genuinely need. When that passport draws scrutiny, the effects ripple outward in ways that are hard to predict. The bond itself is a kind of insurance, a deposit of faith. It says, in effect, we will trust you, but hold this while we do. What sits beneath the headline is something many small nations know: the tension between openness and the world's appetite for control. Vanuatu has weathered cyclones, colonial histories, and the slow work of building a country from many languages and many shores. A question about visas will not unsettle that foundation, but it is a reminder that even in the calm waters of the Pacific, the currents of international policy move quietly, and sometimes they brush up against places that simply want to be seen clearly. If you're still with me, we'll carry on. Cyprus has been sitting on something the rest of Europe is quietly waiting for. Beneath the eastern Mediterranean, off the island's southern coast, lies natural gas enough that officials in Nicosia now say it could begin flowing to European markets by the first half of 2028. The country's energy minister put that timeline forward recently, and it lands at a moment when the European Union has been looking hard for new suppliers, trying to loosen its dependence on older pipelines and older arrangements. The details of extraction and export are still being worked out. There's a link being planned between Cyprus and Israel, with regulators now reviewing submissions for that undersea connection. If it moves ahead, it would tie two energy stories together in a way that neither country could manage quite so easily alone. And around the island, life goes on in its familiar rhythms. Fishermen have started putting lionfish, an invasive species that has spread quickly through warming Mediterranean waters, on local menus, turning an ecological problem into something you can cook. Politicians talk cautiously about renegotiation on the long-standing division of the island, while others push for Cyprus to join the Schengen area without waiting for that question to be settled. But underneath all of it, literally, there's this gas, and the promise it carries isn't just for Cyprus. It's for a continent trying to figure out where its next warmth will come from. If you're still with me, hold that thought. A small island with something large beneath the seafloor, preparing to share it. Myanmar has said that more than 300,000 Rohingya refugees have been verified for repatriation as the exodus from Rakhine State approaches its 9th year. The announcement came through official channels, and it describes a bilateral process, one involving both Myanmar and Bangladesh, the country where most of the refugees have been living in sprawling camps since 2017. Myanmar's language is careful. The returns, officials say, will happen once security improves. What that means in practice and when remains unclear. Bangladesh has pushed back on Myanmar's figures, rejecting the claim that only around 540,000 refugees remain. The camps around Cox's Bazar hold far more than that, and the discrepancy over numbers is part of a larger disagreement about who counts and who decides when going home is possible. All of this unfolds while the International Court of Justice continues to hear a genocide case against Myanmar, and while United Nations investigators have reported that the country's military continues to target civilians. For the Rohingya themselves, the word repatriation carries a complicated weight. There's the hope of return, and there is the fear of what return might mean. Families have raised children in those camps. Children who were born there have never seen the place their parents call home. If you're still with me, hold that for a moment. The idea of home is something both longed for and uncertain, held at a distance that is not only geographical. The 9th year approaches, and the question of return remains open, patient, unresolved. Nigeria has been watching its newest refinery with a kind of quiet wonder, and these days that attention is turning toward what comes next. The Dangote refinery, the vast complex outside Lagos that has reshaped the country's relationship with its own oil, is planning a public share offering aimed not at foreign markets, but at everyday Nigerians. There will be no listing abroad for now. The shares, when they come, are meant to stay close to home. It's a choice that carries a certain weight in a country that has long sent its crude overseas and bought back fuel at a premium. A refinery that size, turning oil into gasoline and diesel on Nigerian soil, already feels like a shift in the story. Now the idea that ordinary people might own a piece of it adds another layer, of course. Plans like these move slowly. Markets have their own rhythm, and a listing of this scale will take time to take shape. But the direction it points inward, toward local investors, toward a sense that the country's biggest industrial project should also belong to its people, is worth sitting with. If you're still with me, hold that thought. A refinery on the coast, lights on through the night, and a door opening perhaps for those who've watched from a distance and wondered when something this big might also be theirs. India is a country that thinks in long stretches of time. These days, one phrase keeps surfacing in the public conversation there, Viksit Bharat 2047. It translates simply enough, a developed India by 2047, the year the country will mark a full century since independence. The details of the roadmap remain a matter of debate, as they should in a place this large and this varied. But the shape of the ambition is clear. It is about lifting living standards, building infrastructure, and preparing a young population for an economy that will look very little like the one their parents knew. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken recently about exam coaching and artificial intelligence training for young people, small signals of where that roadmap might lead. And India is navigating all of this in a world that hardly makes it easy, caught between shifting alliances, trade pressures, and the usual turbulence of a planet that never sits still. What stays with you is the framing, not a 5-year plan or a decade of targets, but a horizon that stretches almost to the centenary of the Republic itself. A generation of Indians will grow up, go to work, and build their lives inside that frame. Whether the vision arrives on schedule or not, it has already done something quiet but real. It has given a very large country a shared word for the future it wants. Monaco is a place that has always lived comfortably between identities. A tiny principality on the Mediterranean, French-speaking, sovereign, and yet deeply woven into the life of its larger neighbor. That in-between quality is at the heart of what's happening with AS Monaco's basketball team, which has been fighting to keep its spot in the French Professional League. The club has been pushing for an earlier hearing, hoping to settle the question sooner rather than later. The details of the dispute are not fully clear, but the stakes are real enough. For a club based outside France to compete in a French league is not unusual in European sport. Geography and history have a way of softening borders that politics keeps firm. But it does mean that belonging is never quite automatic. It has to be argued for, defended, renewed. Monaco's basketball team has earned its place through performance, through years of showing up and competing at a high level. And now it waits to make that case more quickly, to bring the hearing forward, to resolve the uncertainty before another season rolls into view. If you're still with me, You might picture it, a small principality by the sea, its team asking to stay in a league that isn't quite home and isn't quite foreign either. Somewhere in that gray space, they're making their stand. Liberia has been quiet for a long time about some of the hardest chapters in its past. These days, that silence is shifting. There is a push toward accountability, a movement to establish war crimes courts, to take on corruption with real reform, and to extend formal rights to the workers who have always lived outside the formal economy. Each of these is its own kind of reckoning. The war crimes courts reach back into conflicts that tore the country apart and left wounds that never fully closed. Anti-corruption reform speaks to the everyday trust between a government and its people. And the rights for informal workers, the traders, the laborers, the people who hold up so much of daily life without a contract or a safety net, that speaks to dignity, to being seen. None of this moves quickly, and nobody in Liberia expects it to. A country rebuilding itself learns to measure progress in patience, but the direction matters. The fact that these conversations are happening at all in public, with weight behind them, that is something worth noticing. Liberia was founded by freed people who carried a complicated hope into a difficult land, and the country has spent generations sorting through what that inheritance means. If you're still with me, you might sit with this one for a moment. A nation choosing to face its past and its present at the same time. Not because it is easy, but because it is time. That is a quiet kind of courage, and it deserves the night. Cuba sits at a moment that people there are calling the end of an era, though. What comes next is still taking shape. The headlines gathered from the island these days carry that question plainly, without fanfare. For decades now, Cuba has lived under a United States economic blockade, and the costs of it run through nearly every part of daily life, from medicine to fuel to the price of a meal. Washington's approach has shifted over the years, and recently the talk has moved away from any military option and towards sanctions, tightening an economic pressure that has been steady for generations. Inside Cuba, the government has been working to cap prices on basic goods, though the reporting from Havana suggests the caps are not always named as such, and ordinary people read between the lines. There is real strain, and yet the island is not standing alone. China sent 15,000 tons of rice to Cuba in a donation that the government acknowledged with gratitude, a gesture of solidarity that lands in a country where every shipment matters. The larger question, the one that hangs in the warm air over Havana and the smaller towns beyond it, is whether this period of pressure and change will close one chapter and open another, or simply deepen the one already being lived. If you are still with me, let that question rest for a moment. Cuba has weathered eras before. Tonight, the island waits, as it so often has, with patience and with pride. In Ethiopia, they've been planting trees, a lot of them, and these days when you plant that many, you need help keeping track. So Ethiopia is turning to satellites, quiet machines moving far overhead, to watch how those newly planted trees are taking root across the country. It's a simple idea, really. You put seedlings in the ground, and then you want to know, are they surviving? Are they growing? Did the rains come at the right time, on the ground? That's hard to answer across a country this large. But from orbit, the story writes itself in green and brown, in patches of canopy spreading year by year. Ethiopia has been working for some time now to restore its highlands and degraded slopes, places where forests once stood and were lost. The satellites give a kind of patience to that effort. They don't rush the answer. They just keep watching, season after season, and tell you where the land is healing and where it still needs help. If you're still with me, picture that for a moment. Rows of young trees somewhere in the Ethiopian highlands, still fragile, still finding their footing in the soil. And far above them, a satellite passing silently through the dark, taking note, not of what's loud or urgent, just of what's growing. Moldova is a small country that has grown used to being talked about by larger ones this week. Reporting from the New York Times and others has drawn back the curtain on something many Moldovans already sensed: a deliberate Russian campaign to derail their pro-Western government. According to these reports, Kremlin files describe Moldova as second on a list, right after Ukraine, part of a broader strategy to weaken NATO and the European Union from within. The details are still emerging, and the full picture remains incomplete. But what is clear is that Moldova, a country of roughly 2.5 million people, finds itself once again caught between ambitions that are not entirely its own. Its government has leaned westward, seeking closer ties with Europe, and that choice has not gone uncontested. If you're still with me, it's worth knowing that Moldova is more than a chess piece in someone else's game. It is a place of rolling hills and deep wine cellars, some of the largest in the world. This week, a European travel feature named a Moldovan winery among the best winery restaurants on the continent, mentioned alongside estates in Tuscany. That's the other Moldova, the one that endures regardless of what distant capitals plan. A country trying to choose its own direction, quietly, while the world watches and sometimes intervenes tonight. That's the story worth holding. Guinea is a country that has long carried wealth beneath its soil. Bauxite, the ore that feeds the world's aluminum, has been the better-known story here for decades. But gold runs through this land too, and these days there's a new chapter forming around it. A mining company called Resolute has joined with Guinea's own state miner to launch a gold joint venture. It's a partnership, which means the country isn't simply granting concessions and stepping aside. Guinea's state miner will hold its own stake, its own seat at the table. That matters in a place where the question of who benefits from underground wealth has shaped politics and public life for generations. The details of the arrangement remain limited, but the shape of it is familiar across West Africa these days, governments seeking to keep more of the value from their own resources closer to home. For a country that has seen its share of political turbulence in recent years, a steady commercial arrangement like this is quietly significant. It doesn't make headlines the way a crisis would, but it suggests a kind of patience, a willingness to build something that might outlast the news cycle. If you're still with me, picture the red laterite roads heading into Guinea's interior, the green hills folding over seams of ore that have waited a very long time. Somewhere in that landscape, a new venture is beginning, and Guinea is holding its share. Botswana has long been known as the country that made diamonds work for it, not just for a few, but for a nation. For decades, those stones pulled from the earth in the Central District built schools, roads, clinics, a steady middle class in a region where that was rare. And lately, the earth has been generous again. The Motswedi diamond, 2,488 carats, the second largest ever found, has finally found a buyer after 2 years of waiting. That's a remarkable stone, and a reminder of what still lies beneath the Kalahari. But if you listen to people in Gaborone these days, the conversation has shifted. Inflation has slowed to around 9.5%, which is something. But the broader worry is quieter and older than any single price index. The headline you hear over and over is about diversification, the urgent need to build an economy that doesn't rise and fall with one mineral. Officials like Mo Dice have been saying it plainly: the growth ambitions are real. The plans exist, but everything hinges on turning paper into results. Continental Re just raised $30 million through a listing in Gaborone, which suggests the financial sector is stirring. And out in the bush, safari operators are adding elephant conservation to their itineraries, betting that Botswana's wilderness might be worth as much one day as what's underground. It's a country standing at a familiar crossroads, grateful for what the earth has given, honest about what comes next. South Korea has raised its voice once more for something that has waited a very long time, an official end to the Korean War. President Lee has urged Pyongyang to come to the table and replace the old armistice with a formal peace. It's a call he made on Liberation Day, the anniversary marking Korea's freedom from colonial rule, a day that carries deep memory on both sides of the border. Up north, the same day was marked with fireworks. Down south, with a proposal. The two gestures sat side by side the way so much does on this peninsula. Celebration here, caution there, and beneath it all, the same unfinished history. The Korean War stopped fighting in 1953, but never truly ended it. Families were split. A border was drawn and never erased. What President Lee is asking for is not dramatic, no sudden opening, no grand gesture, but something quieter and perhaps harder, a conversation held in good faith to close a chapter that has stayed open for over 70 years. He has also spoken of empathy for colonial-era victims as essential to closer ties with Japan, another thread in the region's tangled memory. Whether Pyongyang will respond, no one can say. These proposals have come and gone before, and the silence from across the border can be long, but the call itself matters. It reminds everyone listening that the door is still there, and that someone is still willing to stand at it and knock. Guatemala has been thinking about its railways again. It's a country where the mountains and the volcanoes and the low coastal plains have always made moving goods a complicated business. Roads, wind, and climb, and the distances that look short on a map can take hours to cross. So when word came that Guatemala is prioritizing rail freight for future funding, it landed as the kind of decision that doesn't make headlines, but quietly reshapes how a country works. The idea is straightforward enough: freight by rail, heavier loads, longer distances, fewer trucks grinding up and down the highlands. It's an old idea in many places, but in Guatemala it carries a particular weight because the country has lived through stretches where rail infrastructure fell quiet, and bringing it back asks for patience and money and a good deal of planning. What the funding priority signals is that the government sees rail not as nostalgia, but as infrastructure worth investing in, something that can ease the pressure on the roads and help trade move with less friction. If you've ever watched freight trains anywhere in the world, you know the rhythm of them, slow, deliberate, almost indifferent to the urgency around them. There's something steadying about that. And in a country as geographically dramatic as Guatemala, where the land itself resists hurry, the thought of goods moving along steel rails through those valleys feels less like progress for its own sake and more like a return to something the country always knew it needed: a quiet plan made for the long road ahead. Bulgaria has been quietly building something new, a hub dedicated to space and defense innovation, a project that moved a step closer to reality this week. The details are still taking shape, but the ambition itself is worth pausing over. A country perhaps better known abroad for its valleys and its Thracian gold, its rose fields and its old monasteries, is now looking upward, towards satellites, towards systems that keep nations secure in a changing world. It's not a dramatic turn. It's more like a door opening slowly in a house that has stood for a long time. Bulgaria has a history in space that many people forget. Bulgarian cosmonauts flew in the Soviet era, and Bulgarian instruments have traveled on interplanetary missions. So this isn't a brand new dream. It's an old curiosity finding a modern workshop. The defense side of the hub speaks to the moment Europe finds itself in, where security is no longer something you assume but something you tend to, carefully, the way you'd tend a garden through an uncertain season. And the space side, well, that's the part that lifts the eyes a little. Somewhere in Bulgaria, people are sitting at tables and drawing plans that reach past the atmosphere. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A small country with deep roots, looking up. There's something steady and hopeful in that, the sense that the future doesn't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it arrives with a blueprint and a quiet decision to begin. In Seychelles, on the largest island of Mshale, there is a national park called Morne Seychellois, a green stretch of mist forest and granite slopes that rises above the capital. These days, something quiet is being added to it. Endemic palm trees, species that belong to these islands and nowhere else on Earth, are being planted there as part of a conservation initiative between Seychelles and China. The project carries a simple, almost tender name, 50 Promises for the Future. Each palm is in its way a promise, a small act of faith that the forest will still be itself a century from now. Seychelles sits far out in the Indian Ocean, more than 1,000 miles from any mainland, and its isolation has made it a place of remarkable living things. The palms that grow here evolved slowly, undisturbed, shaped by trade winds and thin soil and time. When you plant one, you are not filling a gap, you are putting something back where it was always meant to be. Morne Seychellois is a good place for such work, high, cool, often wrapped in cloud. The young palms will take root in that damp air and grow at their own unhurried pace. If you're still with me, picture them there. Small green stems on a forest floor, barely taller than a person's knee, already belonging. Some promises are loud. These ones are still and patient and very much alive. The Bahamas has a new arrival on its western edge, out where the islands thin and the Gulf Stream runs deep. Westgate Resorts, a company long familiar to travelers in the United States, has opened its first Caribbean destination at Bimini Bay. For a brand that has built its name across inland and coastal properties stateside, this is a step into warmer water and a quiet sign of confidence in these islands. Bimini itself is a small place, a slender chain sitting closer to Florida than to Nassau. Fishermen know it, divers know it. It has never carried the sheer volume of visitors that crowd the bigger islands to the south and east. That may be part of what drew Westgate here, the chance to offer something that feels set apart, a little harder to reach, and quieter for it. The opening is modest in the way of resort news, but it tells you something about how the map of Caribbean travel keeps shifting. Companies look past the familiar names and toward the smaller ones, the places that still feel like they belong to the people who live there. If you've ever passed through Bimini, you know the quality of that light in the late afternoon, the way the water changes color in shallow patches. A resort won't change that, but it might mean a few more people come to see it for themselves, and some of them may decide the quiet is worth the longer journey. In Mali, the ruling junta has pardoned a French agent who had been jailed on charges of undermining state security. The details of the case are not widely known, but the fact of the pardon is what carries the story, a quiet reversal, a door opened where one had been shut. Mali has been under military rule since a series of coups, and relations with France, the former colonial power, have shifted sharply in recent years. French forces once operated across Mali's north as part of a counterterrorism mission. That partnership ended, and the distance between the two countries has only widened since. So a pardon like this, small as it may seem, carries more than one layer. It is a legal act, but also a signal, one that says something about how Mali's current leaders choose to manage their ties, even strained ones, with a country whose history here is long and complicated. We don't know the agent's name from what's been reported, or the circumstances that led to the arrest, or what comes next for the person at the center of it. What we have is the outline: someone detained, charged, held, and now released by presidential pardon. In a country where so much remains unsettled, where conflict still touches the north, and where the political future is far from certain, a single act of clemency can feel both small and significant at once. And if you're still with me, we'll let that sit for a moment before we move along. Nicaragua is a country of lakes and volcanoes, of old cathedrals and quiet coastal towns, and these days it is a country where the space between the government and the Catholic Church has grown very wide and very cold. For more than 40 days, a bishop was missing. Not traveling, not resting somewhere distant, simply gone, with no word of where he was or what had happened to him. In a country where the church has long been a voice for people who feel they have none, his silence was felt deeply, and not only by those who share his faith. People waited, they prayed, they asked questions that went unanswered. Then the government released a video. In it, the bishop appeared alive, present, speaking to the camera. What he said, and under what conditions, the details remain thin. But the image itself was enough to shift something, at least for a moment. He had been found in the sense that the state had acknowledged where he was. Nicaragua holds others too. Reports describe dozens of political prisoners and others classified as forcibly disappeared, their families still waiting for even a fragment of what the bishop's people received. The tension between the state and the church is not new there, and it does not seem to be easing. But for one family, one diocese, one congregation, there was at least this: a face on a screen, a voice, proof of life. And in a place where silence has become a kind of weather, even that can feel like something to hold. Guinea-Bissau, that small West African nation nestled between Senegal and Guinea, has begun a national campaign ahead of a constitutional referendum. The details of the campaign are still taking shape, but the purpose is clear enough. The country is asking its people to weigh in on how they want to be governed. Constitutional referendums are weighty things in any country. In Guinea-Bissau, they carry a particular kind of weight. The nation has known political instability for much of its independence, with periods of turbulence that have tested its institutions and the patience of its people. A referendum, then, is not just a procedural matter. It is a moment of collective reflection, a chance to decide what the framework of the state should look like going forward. And somewhere in the midst of all this, Guinea-Bissau's former president traveled to Zanzibar, where Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan welcomed him at the Kizimkazi Festival. A small diplomatic courtesy, perhaps, but it speaks to something larger: the quiet web of relationships that holds the region together, the way leaders move between countries not always for grand negotiations but sometimes simply to be present with one another. Back home, the campaign will unfold across Guinea-Bissau's towns and villages, in markets and meeting places, wherever people gather to hear and to ask questions. What comes of the referendum remains to be seen. But the act of asking, of bringing the question to the people, is itself something worth noting as the night settles over Bissau and the countryside beyond. Papua New Guinea sits between the Coral Sea and the deep Pacific, a country of more than 800 languages and a landscape that rises from mangrove coast to highland ridge. Among the many stories moving through the country this week, one caught my attention for its quiet patience. Papua New Guinea and Australia have agreed to work together to strengthen secondary education. The details are few, but the intention is clear: to help more young people in Papua New Guinea finish school with the skills and confidence they need. It is the kind of story that rarely makes headlines far from home because nothing in it is dramatic. But if you think about what secondary education means in a country where so many communities are remote, where classrooms can be a long walk or a boat ride away, the weight of it settles in. Every teacher trained, every curriculum improved, every student who stays one more year, that is a thread pulled through the fabric of a whole generation. Australia's partnership here is not new. The two countries have shared classrooms, programs, and plans before, each one trying to close the distance between what a child in a village might dream and what a school system can offer. What stands out this time is the focus on secondary education specifically, that fragile bridge between childhood and the wider world. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A classroom somewhere in the highlands or along the north coast, the afternoon rain tapping on a tin roof, and a student bent over a notebook, writing something that might matter more than anyone knows. The Marshall Islands sit in the middle of the Pacific, and being in the middle has always meant something particular for the people who live there. These days, the Pacific is drawing deeper lines between great powers. A missile test by China has sharpened a divide that's been widening for some time, as militaries turn these vast waters into something of a proving ground and a chessboard at once. For the Marshall Islands, this is not an abstract worry. The people here carry living memory of what it means when powerful nations use the Pacific as a testing site. Decades of nuclear testing left scars across atolls and families that have not fully healed. So when missiles fly and fleets grow, it lands differently here than it does in capitals far away. The Marshall Islands government has spoken before about the need to keep the Pacific peaceful, to treat it as home rather than highway. And there is a quiet firmness in that position, the kind that comes from knowing the cost firsthand. If you're still with me, you might sit with that for a moment, a small nation, scattered across coral and lagoon, asking simply that the ocean around it not be turned into a theater for someone else's ambitions. The night settles over the water there now, the same water that connects all of these scattered islands, steady and patient, holding more history than any map can show. Algeria has begun exporting its first shipments of jet fuel to Niger, a quiet but meaningful step between two neighbors, separated by a vast stretch of the Sahara. The headline is simple. The story behind it is one of distance, desert, and the slow building of economic ties across a region where borders are long and infrastructure is hard-won. Algeria, with its substantial energy sector, has long been a producer of refined fuels. Niger, landlocked and to the south, has its own resources but relies on regional partners for certain refined products. So these shipments, moving across the Sahel, represent a practical exchange. One country's refinery output meeting another country's aviation needs. It is the kind of news that might not make much noise in the wider world, but if you live along that corridor, it matters. Trade routes across the Sahara have carried salt, gold, and ideas for centuries. Jet fuel is newer cargo, but it travels the same ancient logic, one place having what another place needs. The details are thin, and I won't dress them up. What we know is that the shipments have started, and that they mark a first, which suggests the road, or whatever route the fuel takes, has only just opened. Whether it grows into something larger, time will tell. For now, somewhere in the desert between Algiers and Niamey, tankers are moving, and two countries are doing the patient work of trade. And that is worth carrying into the night. Namibia is a country of vast distances and wide open sky, and these days it is reaching for more of its power from the wind that sweeps across that sky. But there was a problem. When the time came to raise a wind turbine, there was no crane in the country big enough to do the job. The kind of crane you would need for something like that, tall enough, strong enough, simply wasn't there. So the crews had to think differently. Rather than build the turbine the usual way, standing the tower upright first and then attaching the blades one by one at the top, they flipped the whole idea around. They attached two of the blades on the ground, tilted at an angle, and then lifted the entire structure, blades and all, in one single movement. It is the kind of solution that sounds almost too simple to work, and yet it did. There is something quietly remarkable about that. You have this enormous machine meant to catch the wind and turn it into electricity, and the hardest part of putting it up was not the engineering of the turbine itself, but the simple absence of a piece of equipment that wealthier countries might take for granted. And instead of waiting, or giving up, or importing a crane at great cost, the people on the ground just reconsidered the problem from a different angle, almost literally. Tonight, somewhere in Namibia, that turbine is standing and its blades are turning in the dark. Mauritania, that vast and mostly desert nation on the western edge of the Sahara, has been quietly reshaping how it taxes the modern economy. The government has moved to bring foreign digital services into its value-added tax net, meaning companies based abroad that sell digital goods or services to customers inside Mauritania will now be drawn into a tax system that previously slipped past them. It's a shift you can see happening across the African continent these days, as governments try to keep pace with an economy that increasingly lives on screens and in cloud servers, rather than in shops you can walk into. For a country where much of the population still lives from pastoralism and fishing, and where the old Saharan trade routes still matter, this might seem like a distant concern, but Mauritania has been changing fast. Mobile money, online platforms, streaming, software subscriptions, these have reached into Nouakchott and into the smaller towns too, and the state has decided that the companies profiting from that reach should contribute something back. The details of how it will work, how enforcement will actually function across borders remain to be seen. That's always the hard part with digital taxation anywhere in the world, but the principle is simple enough, and Mauritania has now put it on paper. If you're still with me, you might sit with that for a moment. A desert nation reaching out in its own quiet way to touch something as weightless as the cloud. Russia has spent these past months surprising the people who said it couldn't hold its economy. Squeezed by sanctions and cut off from much of the world, has kept moving. Factories humming, shops open, paychecks landing. For a while, the numbers told a story of resilience. But lately, the people watching closely say the cracks are getting harder to paper over. The war effort has pulled workers and resources toward the front, leaving gaps elsewhere. Interest rates sit high. Inflation nibbles at household budgets in ways that don't always show up in official figures. And the things that have kept the economy upright, military spending, redirected trade routes, careful improvisation, aren't the kind of foundations that grow stronger over time. Out beyond the financial reports, the strain shows in quieter ways. Industrial sites deep inside Russia have come under drone strikes, some far from the border. Questions travel between capitals Moscow asking Washington and Ankara about reported arms transfers, neighbors watching Moldova's politics with suspicion. None of it is a single crisis. It's more like a slow, steady weight settling across the country's foundations. The economy hasn't buckled. But the people who study it are speaking less about defiance now and more about how long defiance can last. If you're still with me, that's the shape of things in Russia tonight. A country still standing, still working, watching the cracks widen and wondering which ones matter most. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.